All right, so welcome everyone to POWTS Chat July 2024. I'm Katie Petzel with DSPS. I'm going to be speaking today, as will Matt Jansen, once I finish up my section here. We learned some new features in Zoom this month, so you'll see there's a few quiz features built in. I hope that it works out. If you could do your best to answer them. We're trying to integrate that, make POWTS Chat a little more interactive, so you'll see that pop up on your screen a couple of times during my presentation here. So for this month, my portion of the chat will be regarding revisions. So we don't talk about revisions too often, but I thought that because it's July, we're in the middle of the working season here, maybe it's an appropriate time to talk about revisions to previously approved plans, why we do them, when we do them, and how we do them. So I'm going to open up a quiz question here. And just so that you guys know, um, all of these polls are anonymous, but we will be able to view the results as a group. So if you could type in your answer, or not type in, but select your answer and then click submit, I would appreciate that. So the question is, do you have any revisions that you need to submit, or are you waiting for revisions to be submitted to you? For example, if you're a county agent. So folks can answer this, and then I'll end the poll here in a couple of minutes or maybe 30 seconds, and we'll view it as a group, and we'll see whether or not this POWTS chat topic is appropriate to you this month. So.
Yeah, and if the polls pops up and you can't see the answers, if you look there, you can just scroll up or down there. So for me, I just see the picture and it says major change of plans. If you scroll down, you can see where it says yes or no buttons to select.
Oh, thank you, Matt. See, there'll be a few growing pains as we learn how this all works.
Yeah,
We interact.
so all
Audience
something new. So we're just making sure that everybody's on the same page here.
All right. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So the results should pop up here. So let's see here. So 29% of people responded that yes, they do have revisions that they need to submit or are waiting for revisions to be submitted. And 71% of people responded no, that they do not. So maybe as we go through this presentation, you'll find out maybe you do have revisions that need to be submitted, or maybe you'll find some information in this presentation that will help you move along and get those revisions either submitted or, uh, point to the submitter that they actually need to submit them. And this is the code sections why. All right. So revisions, why do we do them? When do we do them? How do we do them? Sometimes things in life don't go as planned, and revisions and POWTS plans are no different than anything else in life. So why? Why do we submit revisions? Well, the first reason being that they are required by SPS 383.22.4a revisions. And we'll go through that entire code section through the length of this presentation. And that's the most basic why. That's the fundamental legal reason why it is required. But also we submit revisions so that they serve to document changes for future reference. So when we go and look at a system 10, 20 years down the line, or a new inspector or a new plumber looks at it, we actually see on the plans what is on the ground. And that is what plans should be. They should document, as that picture shows, how the workman installed, what the system actually looks like, how it actually functions, not how we dreamed that it would, but how it actually looks on the ground. So here's the code section of SPS 383.2.4 revisions. And we'll go through this through the presentation. I'm not going to read it all out loud to you here. That would be boring, but we'll get through it all as we go. But as you can see, this code section actually is not that long, but it covers everything to do with revisions. So when is a revision absolutely required? When does 383.22.4 say that revisions are required? Well, first is it is required absolutely when a modification to the design of a POWTS that has been previously granted approval, if it involves any of the following as we go along, and it should be submitted to the applicable reviewing agency for review. And we'll go through who those are in each scenario as we go through the presentation. So the first change to a plan that requires a revision absolutely is anytime there's a change in wastewater flow or contaminant load. So you can see in that picture there, going from a 5-bedroom to a 4-bedroom to a 5-bedroom house. That's a change in wastewater flow. It would require a revision, but a change to a contaminant load would be as well. So let's say a facility was originally designed for an office space, and they come to find out that the proposed what's going to be in the building is actually a restaurant, and the plan review is still active, the sanitary permit is still active. Well, they can do a revision, and they need to do a revision because the contaminant load from an office space to a restaurant is completely different. The second scenario outlined in SPS 32322-4A for when a revision is absolutely required is when there is a replacement or an addition of a POWTS component listed in table 383-4-1. So those are the restricted technologies, and I have a screenshot of that pulled up. So those are when there is the addition or replacement of a pressure distribution component with less than 1/8 inch orifice sizes. So that's drip distribution primarily. Anytime a mechanical POWTS treatment component is added or replaced, so ATUs, things like that, MBBRs, a disinfection unit like chlorinators, ozone units, which we don't have approved, or ultraviolet light unit, which may become more applicable as we go forward into the future. Or if there is a replacement or an addition of a sand, gravel, or peat filter, but that does not include a mound system. It's a specific sand filter or specific peat filter, which we don't see those very often anymore at all. Anytime there is an addition of a POWTS dispersal component, a revision is absolutely required. So if we were to have a holding tank permit for an example here, a 1200-800, and we're adding the distribution dispersal component to it, then a revision is absolutely required. These are all pretty obvious, hopefully, but that one more so. But additionally, anytime there's a change to one or more of the dispersal components involving any of the following. So if the location of the dispersal component is outside of the suitable evaluated areas or proposed depths or elevations. So I have an example here that is completely made up. This submitter, I made this example up. This is not a real scenario. But for example, if a soil test was done and it comes to be that there's an encumbrance there, so my made up scenario here is there's a gas pipeline where the cell was proposed to be, and it has to be moved. So the cell in this scenario, hypothetical, had to be moved outside of the tested area. It's still on the same contour, but additional borings will be required, and because of slopes and things like that, other things will have to be changed with the plan. Anytime there's a change to the dispersal component dimensions, anything with the distribution cell or the basal area. So my made up example here, we're going from a 6x75 rock cell to an 8x50. Now it's a change to the distribution cell dimensions, and it would be a change to the basal area, so that would require a revision. Anytime there's a change of the type of dispersal component, so an example here going from easy flow to infiltrators, that would be a change, but it could be anything. Or a change to the design of a pressure distribution component, except for changes to pumps, force main lengths, total dynamic head, or pump control settings. So my example here, the plan hypothetically originally had 3/16 orifices, and for some reason was changed to 5/32. So that would be a change to the pressure distribution component, and it would require a revision. But if there was a change to, say, going from one type of pump to another, that would not necessarily require a revision. Or if the force main length goes from 50 feet to 100 feet, wouldn't necessarily require a revision. Total dynamic head and pump control settings, likewise, those do not require revisions. So now that we know when revisions are absolutely required, we're going to go through who it should be submitted to. So who is the applicable reviewing agency? So who is it? Plans that must be reviewed at the governmental level are those plans that those POWTS that serve not more than one or two family dwellings and their accessory buildings, and use gravity distribution for the effluent to an in-ground distribution cell and or a component manual design. Additionally, it would be holding tanks that are less than 3,000 gallons per day estimated flow and our component manual reviews. So these are the applicable reviewing agencies. You're very familiar with these. And it's no different than who you would submit the plan review to. The revisions go to who the plan review would go to. So what plans can be reviewed either by the state, DSPS, or as a designated agent. So these would be POWTS that completely utilize treatment or dispersal technologies that are approved under SPS 384.10.2 or 3 or 383.61. So those are the component manuals, and anytime that reference is in there, it's referring to the component manuals. So things like a standard mound, a standard at grade, an Elgin mound, whatever. If it's a component manual review, then it can be submitted either to the state or to the designated agent if the county or local government unit, if you're in Milwaukee, has that designated agent status. Additionally, it could either be submitted to the state or to the designated agent if there is a holding tank that is a component manual holding tank that serves above 3,000 gallons per day. So just a really, really big holding tank. So those revisions would be submitted to those people in that case. And so who is the reviewing? What are plans that must be reviewed at the state level? So those are POWTS that are owned by the state. So I have a map here of, I believe, all the state parks and state forests in the state, I think. So those would be POWTS that are owned by the state, or facilities that are owned by the state or served by a POWTS. So those must be reviewed at the state level, and likewise revisions must be submitted to plans at the state level, so through ISLA. Additionally, POWTS that are designed outside of the approved component manual, so individual site designs, those must be reviewed at the state level. So I have an example here that's probably pretty difficult to see if you're on a mobile device, but hopefully you can see it on a computer. It's a mound site with fill soils. So there's the fill line right there above that. Because it is not in situ soil, that is the immediate interface with the dispersal and treatment component, it is an individual site design. Likewise, I have an example here of a constructed wetland. So that's at Kettle Moraine Lutheran High School. They have a constructed wetland. Those are individual site designs, and those would be reviewed at the state level, as would any revisions to their plans. Also, any POWTS that treat domestic wastewater combined with industrial wastewater, which in the most recent component manual updates, we made that more clear that those are individual site designs, as well as experimental systems. So any of those plans that were reviewed at the state level must have their revisions submitted to them at the state level. Okay, so as a reminder, so we're getting through the code sections here. They're not exactly in order, but here's here's section E. If revisions are submitted to and approved by the department, the owner of the site for the POWTS or the owner's agent shall file the revisions with the governmental unit which issued the sanitary permit. So that's there as a requirement that if you get revisions approved for a state approved plan, then those revisions must also be filed with the governmental unit who issued the sanitary permit. So in most cases, that's going to be the county. You have to submit your revisions to the county so that it's filed away with those original plans. Or if it's a state-owned project and state-issued sanitary permit, then it has to be filed with the state. If you're filing revisions to state-owned plans, it's all through ISLA. We all know where it is, so it's filed along with it. Okay, so additionally, in that section, so in 383.22.4b, like I said, we're going a little bit out of order, but I thought this is what would be the appropriate order to talk about it. And if there is a modification to the design of a POWTS for which a plan has been previously approved as has a sanitary permit, it may be submitted to the governmental unit which issued the sanitary permit if the proposed modification involves a change which is not listed in paragraph A, which was those major revisions that we went through, a change to the dispersal component, a change to the pressure distribution network. Those minor revisions can be submitted to the governmental unit which issued the sanitary permit if the governmental unit agrees to review the proposed minor revision. So that if and agree is the really important statement here. The governmental unit has the right to say that modification to that mound, it requires a state revision. I don't feel comfortable or I don't want to do that proposed minor revision. They can remand it, I guess, back to the state. So when should a revision be filed? This is a lot of counties have revisions that float out there for a long period of time. I know when I worked for a county, I was guilty of that too. They sat out there for too long. But when should a revision be filed? Well, as soon as it becomes known. That's simple as that. And that is covered in the code section 383.22.4C, which the installer of a POWTS may not implement or undertake the proposed revisions under paragraph A or B until written approval is obtained from the applicable reviewing agency. So we all know that changes happen, sometimes by accident or by not, but as soon as a revision, a condition exists that a revision should be filed for, it should be filed for as soon as it becomes known. All right, so we're gonna try to do a few more quiz questions here. So I have 3 quiz questions, and the idea behind these quiz questions is that I want to know whether or not a revision is required. So we will see. And remember, all of this is anonymous. And I'm going to launch it right here. So question 1 of 3. So is a revision required? You typically buy your high water alarms for holding tanks from your tank manufacturer. They are sold out. So you pick up a few at a local big box home improvement store and use them on the next few systems. Are revisions required? All right, I am going to end the poll here and share the results. So we have a bit of a split here. About 1/4 say yes, and little over 3/4 say no. The answer to this one is no. A revision is not required for this. Should it be noted on the plan, the inspection report, and on the plan? Yes, but is a revision required per 383.22.4? No. The alarm, the high water alarm, is not a it's not a product, it's not an approved product. It is what it is. It does its job, and if it can do its job, it should be noted what that alarm is, but a revision is not required. All right, question number 2. Okay, so question number 2, is a revision required? A house plan has changed from a full basement to a slab on grade. It was to be served by a proposed state-approved pressurized at-grade. You now have enough elevation difference to make a gravity at-grade work, and that is the preference of the homeowner. Is a revision required to go from pressure distribution to gravity distribution? All right, so I'm going to cut it off there and share the results. So a bit of a split here. So you note that I added that third choice there of if a governmental unit issued the standard does not agree to review it. A majority of people answered yes, and that is the correct answer. So it is a change to the distribution component. We're going from pressure distribution. It's a change to the pressure distribution component, which there is no longer one. And even though it's the same component manual, pressure distribution to gravity distribution at grades, it is a change, and it does require a revision. It could either go to the county if they're a designated agent for at grades of that type, of both types, or it could go to the state if that was who originally. All right, and the third question here. Okay, so on this one, is a revision required? In conversation with the homeowners, you find that they have some rather unusual water usage habits. You decide what they are. You decide that switching from demand dosing to time dosing is best for the long-term performance of the mound component. The plan is state approved. Does this change require a revision to be submitted to the state? All right, so this one we have even more of a, should share it, This one we have even more of a split here. Slightly under the majority say yes, fewer say no, and even fewer than that say yes if the governmental unit which issued the sanitary permit does not agree to review it. And maybe there's some interpretation of the code here, but my thoughts on this are going from time dosing to demand dosing to time dosing is it's a pump control setting. So technically, 383.22.4 does not require a revision for it, and it could be revised at the county level. However, I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong to assume this, that most county agents would not feel comfortable reviewing those time dose settings to make sure that they are in line with what the system can handle. So if I was answering this question, I would say yes, if the governmental unit which issued the sanitary permit does not agree to review it. But
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember on these, is that, there's a difference between what's required as an actual revision, where you have to resubmit plans, and things that should be noted on the plan or on the inspection. So some things like we talked about, switching out like a float, we don't necessarily need to send in a whole new plan, a revision, but you still should note that, hey, we changed from product A to product B, things like that. So even though some things may not require an actual revision, we still have to make sure that we're noting any changes, or documenting them on the plans or during the inspection process.
thank you, Matt. Okay, so now we got through when revisions are required and a little quiz on them. I thought it would be helpful because I do see mistakes with this at the state level. State revisions being submitted to the state incorrectly. So I thought it would be useful to go through a few screenshots on how you submit a revision for a state approved plan. So the way that you do it is the first thing you do is you log into your ISLA account through the typical community portal login, and you go to your plan review tab there, so circled, so not the credentials and not permits, but your plan review tab, and you click here to view and search all plan reviews, and that will pull up all of your plan reviews that you either already have approved, are pending, or anything that you've worked on in ISLA before. What you're going to want to do is find the plan that you are looking for, either by sorting the list or using the search bar. So you can use the search bar here if you know that the plan is under a certain name, or you have a good naming system for your plans, you can easily search there. Or you can sort by the number, so that would be the DIS or PWTS number, the type, or the project name, and you can find it that way. There's a couple of different ways to do it, but however you find it is the way that you find it, and those are just ways that are quicker than sorting through some people who have hundreds of plans that are submitted to the state. So once you find the plan that you need to revise, you'll click here in the action column on this options button, and it will drop down, and there will be a selection there for a plan review revision, and you will select that. And the reason that you do that this way is a lot of the information will already be populated, and for some other reasons that we'll go through. So once you click that, you'll be prompted with what looks like this new application. It's the same kind of form format that you would do for a standard component manual review, but since you've already entered in all the site information for the original plan review, if you can find that the approval letter that you have, that site number, you can enter that in when you're prompted to enter the project and site information, and that way you don't have to enter in all of the details for where it's located and things like that. Saves a little bit of time. Pretty nice. So why do it this way? After that, you'll just go through the same and then review and submit as the same you normally would, pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. So why do it this way? Well, one, it saves you time, slightly quicker to enter in this way. It saves you money. So sometimes I see people submitting full component manual reviews and paying $250 review fees for what is effectively a revision. And don't give the state more money than you need to. It's $85 for a revision fee versus $250 for a component manual review fee. Why pay more? There's just no reason to do that. And for ease, so when you do it this way, there's a record, not a paper trail because it's in the cloud, but a trail of the original plan review and who was the original reviewer. And it gets directly assigned to the original reviewer. So if there were strange questions about the site, that reviewer will probably remember it depending on when it was reviewed, and it'll just be faster that way. You know, you're working with the same original reviewer, they'll probably have a memory of it. And so not only is it a better way to do it, it's a faster way to do it, and it's a cheaper way to do it. So that's useful for people. But I wanted to note, when you do submit a revision, not only to the state, but to everyone, just please indicate what has changed. You know, don't make us play Where's Waldo on this plan to figure out what has changed, because it does take time. And if your plan takes more time, then it slows down the queue for everyone else. So it's just advantageous to indicate what you have changed on it. So I have an example here from a submitter. It's a revision to this previously approved plan. They included the PWTS number, which is very useful. It's an existing 3-bedroom home. This owner no longer plans to raise the basement and add a 4th bedroom to the home. So we know that instead of originally being a 4-bedroom design, we're going down to 3, and there'll be elevation changes regarding the building, sewer, and probably the tank placement. So that just makes it so much quicker to review if you write down what has changed. And that way we don't miss things, and that way we don't call and ask, oh, what changed, when we're trying to suss out what it was. And that is all I have for revisions. So I can take a look at the chat if people have questions. Otherwise, Matt is going to take it from here on out.
Katie, this is Barry Sullivan in Zalke County. I do have one question.
Sure.
If the plans are approved at the state level, let's say an ISD, and then comes into our office for us to issue the sanitary permit. After we issue the sanitary permit, let's say there is a plan revision, can we review and approve that plan revision, or does the plumber has to go back to the state to get approval from the state because it was issued at the state?
If it is any of the changes, that the major revisions that we covered, then it has to go back to the state. But if it's a minor thing, so for example, a force main length change, or even like there's a building, the building wasn't on the site plan exactly how it is, you know, you would include that on your inspection report, and you would.
Okay.
If it's a minor change, it can be done at the county, but if it's a major change as outlined in 38320.
What about tank location? Because I know you used to do under OCOM that way, if the tanks were moved more than 25 feet, they had to go through a plan revision on that. Is that's gone now?
Tank placement can be done at the county level.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to take over here. I've got a few things to go through for my section. So some of the things I want to talk about is we do have a technical advisory committee meeting coming up, and I wanted to talk about what's going to be covered at that. And then we'll go through some frequently asked questions, or I don't know if they're frequently, but some questions that we've had pop up over the last month or two here. So the first thing is that we do have the POWTS Technical Advisory Committee. They are having a meeting that is scheduled for July 15th at 9 o'clock. This is going to be a virtual meeting, so they're just going to do it online. It is a public meeting. It's noticed. If you're interested and want to know who's part of the Technical Advisory Committee, things like that, if you go to our website, you can click on up at the top there, you know, instead of the programs, you can go into our boards and committees, and you can search down there and find out about the POWTS Technical Advisory Committee. For those of you that aren't aware of it, I mean, it is an advisory committee, so they will help advise us on different aspects. You know, if we have a new component manual or things like that, you know, they are, again, our advisories, so we don't have to, you know, do what they say. They are an advisory role, but then again, we do rely heavily upon them, made up of professionals in the industry, and we do value their input. So some of the things that are going to be talked about upcoming in this next meeting is we did talk a little bit about this before with them, but the department, along with the DNR, has an MOU, memorandum of understanding, between the two agencies. And the last one was done, I believe, in '99. It's sort of out of date, and we wanted to go through and refresh that and make sure that um, that it's, everything in there is stated accurately and according to the current codes, current rules. So what this MOU does is that it addresses large scale systems. Those are larger than 12,000 gallons a day. Actually, I've got the arrow the wrong way. It should be larger than 12,000 gallons a day, not less than. And commingled domestic industrial wastewater. So that's what the MOU talks about. So this just details how the agencies cooperatively manage the application approval process. So it just says, who's going to look at this first, where does it go from there, some of the major things at how things are reviewed and looked at. It doesn't contain code language or interpretations of the codes. Each agency will still do that. So it doesn't say exactly how the department is going to review a plan, what are we going to require, different things. It basically just says how the agencies are going to work together to cooperatively do the reviews on these. So it says this is what the DNR is going to do. This is what DSPS is going to do. Who does what first? How do we hand it off between each other? So it sort of fleshes out how that's going to work. How that's going to work between the two agencies. We also have the SPS 383 appendix. We do have a draft of Table A 38343-1 up for discussion. So what that is that's the one that deals with public wastewater flows, or the commercial facilities. And so there's it's reorganization of that. So we just group things like lodging together, things like that, just so it's a little bit easier to find things on the table. And then we also added a few new categories, some that we've had consistent questions on about how do we size, how do we come up with some numbers. So wedding barns has been a big one that we've seen a lot. How do we size for those? We have one here that we're calling a MRF. That's my idea, a multi-unit residential facility. So like larger apartment buildings or things like that, where we have a bunch of different units, and we know they're not going to be in maximum capacity. So when we get to these larger systems, we understand that not every bedroom is going to have full occupancy at all times. So we know that we can back off on our sizing a little bit. And then also short-term rentals, so the ones that we think of as the VRBOs or things like that, how to size for those. So we do have a few new categories, some recommendations in there for those. And then we've also adjusted a few flow rates to bring them in line with similar generators. So make sure things like if you're sitting in a theater or an assembly hall, that those should be the same generations of waste, because they're basically just a person sitting there. To make sure that we're more in compliance with the different types of generators, that they're more uniform, and then also based on some nationwide data of some of these newer ones that we've seen, like wedding burns or short-term rentals, things like that. Make sure that we're in line with what's going on elsewhere and what's been published. So there are a few changes on the appendix. Also, want to talk about hydrograph update. It was recommended at the last meeting that the hydrograph method be suspended, which the department did take action on as of April 1st. We've been having ongoing discussions, how do we, build it back? How do we reinstate the hydrograph, or what parts or to what extent? And we've had ongoing discussions with the Wisconsin Geological Natural History Survey, that's WGNHS, and they have a planned research project into Central Sand. So they propose to us what they can do to help us out. They're the experts on groundwater, and they're going to help determine the reliability and the extent to which we can use those monitoring wells, and where we think they're reliable and how far we can use them. So but anyway, they have a research proposal for us, some time, effort, money that they're going to expend to help us figure this out, and the details will be forthcoming at the meeting. So just wanted to let you know a little bit about what's going on with the TAC, and there are some important issues being brought up for discussion out there. And after the TAC, when we get some resolution, we take their input, and the department decides a path forward. or we get an MOU assigned, things like that, then obviously we'll share that information with everybody and future updates. So some of the things that we've seen come in here over the last month or two, like I said, they're really not frequently asked questions, but they were asked once at least, and I think they're important enough to share with everybody that you may have something similar, or may have the same question, or maybe next month you may have this question come up. So I had a question, hydrograph use. Hydrograph, was suspended. The method was suspended. So we have a soil test utilizing the hydrograph procedure, and it was performed prior to April 1st when the suspension took effect, but was never filed with the county. What options are available? Well, with the suspension, we're not allowing processing of any new hydrograph forms. So if the soil test was done or the hydrograph was done, but nothing was filed, we're not able to process those at this time. So since the suspension, can't approve any of the soil tests or any of the hydrograph methods utilizing that procedure. So either we'd have to use the limitation um, that's listed on the soil test, wherever the redoxymorphic features are, or we'd have to pursue another method under 385.60. So, I mean, you can do the interpretive, do monitoring, or controlled flowage, such as this here. You might be able to go through and, if that's applicable, use one of the other methods. State-owned projects. Katie did talk some about this. I've run into this a couple times this summer, but what's the procedure for installing a septic system on state-owned property? So I should have had a quiz come up on, we should have put one in here about, what do you need to do? Well, the statutes and code don't differentiate between state-owned and private systems. So the only exception is that the counties don't have jurisdiction, but the state does. So this means that you still have to do a soil test, still have to get an approved plan, you still have to get a permit, and you still have to get the system inspection. So just like a 3-bedroom home, you still have to go through all the processes normally to installing a septic system. It's just that the county doesn't have jurisdiction, the state does. So um, you can do the soil test, you obtain the plan, we'll review the soil test at the time the plan is submitted. Once you get an approved plan, you have to go through ISLA and submit for a state sanitary permit through ISLA for that site. And then the inspection will have to be coordinated with the district wastewater person to go out there and do those kind of inspections. So still need all the same things that you would on any other kind of system. It's just that, the county doesn't do the inspections of the plan review or the permit issuance. Those all come back to the state. So tank sizing, how do we calculate the required size of a septic tank? Happened to be driving by this site here, I think it was last week. Well, somebody obviously calculated their own size of a tank. This is an old or carboy that they'd put in the ground as their septic tank. Actually, it was a holding tank. But how do you calculate the tank size? We have these questions come up every once in a while. Somebody says, well, how do we determine that? All the tank product approvals list the maximum gallons per day for which a tank is approved. So if you look up certain brand or manufacturer of a tank, XYZ, they will say that this tank is rated for X number of gallons per day flow. It's rated for whatever, 750 gallons a day flow. So then you know that it's suitable for a 5-bedroom home or a 5-bedroom system, or a commercial facility that is under 750 gallons per day. However, sometimes we get these where we have a tank and maybe it's an older one. It's still in good shape, but we don't know what the product approval is because it's not a currently made tank, or it's a manufacturer that's no longer in business. So how do we back calculate? If we say, hey, is this tank going to be big enough for me? I need to figure it out. But I know how many gallons it is. What's the size? You can multiply. There's a magic number, 2.088. That'll give you the size needed. So for example, a 450 gallon per day system, a 3-bedroom home, times the 2.088 would give you 940 gallons. So that would be the minimum size tank for a residence. But remember, this is for the 3-year service frequency. So I do have the formulas out there. If somebody's interested, I can share that with you. if you want to calculate out different service frequencies or things like that, or if I have a tank that's only 900 gallons, what would be the service frequency on that if I want to, do a 450? So, but the basic one that you need to remember is 2.088, and that will tell you times your daily wastewater flow will tell you how big of a tank that you would need. Had some questions about what's the proper license required, who can do plumbing on the building sewer from the building to a septic tank. So in all reality, POWTS or septic systems start at the septic tank. So everything beyond that is general plumbing. It's not really the POWTS. So we have questions about building sewer. It's sort of this in between no man's land. It's inside the building we know is general plumbing, and outside the building is something different in the building sewer until we get to the septic tank, and that's where the a traditional septic system starts. So who can do that? Well, a full plumber. So if you're you got your full license, you can do that. Restricted service, master plumber restricted can do that. They can work on building sewers also, and also pipe layers. It's something that we don't think of very often, but a pipe layer could also work on that building sewer. And it also includes the various licenses in each category. So if you're a full master, you can, a full journeyman, full learner, or a learner, or an apprentice under there. All those could work. Or if you're restricted journeyman, or somebody working underneath them. So all the usual supervision rules apply. I'm not going to get into who has to be out there or whatever, but that's who can work on a building sewer. So we've had these questions come up, a few here over the summer and spring. I've had my sand tested. Does it meet ASTM C33? And then I'll usually get an email or somebody will send me, the sand curve graph, or they'll have the data for, sieve size 200. This is what passed or whatever. And they'll say, tell me, does this mound sand meet or not meet? Well, it's not up to us at the state to decide that. It's up to the lab to decide that. So there is an ASTM C33 standard that's published. The labs, as being a lab that tests to these standards, they subscribe to the ASTM database, and they know what the criteria is. So if you took a sample to a lab, or if you're a county saying, hey, I got this lab sample and they want to know if it meets or not, the lab has to test according to that standard. So the lab result needs to state, or should state, if the sand met all the required sieve sizes. So you don't have to come to the state for an approval for that. Our code says you must meet ASTM C33 standard, and it has to be washed. I mean, we got a couple other things in there, but it has to meet that standard. So they need to have evidence, or you as a pit owner need to have evidence that the sand meets the standard. So if the lab's not providing that, then you need to go back to the lab and say, okay, you tested it according to the standard. I need to know, does it pass or doesn't it? And they should say, whether it does or does not meet the standard. So that's the important difference, is that we don't certify the sand or approve the sand. The lab test needs to demonstrate that it does meet or does not meet. Had this question come up about mound designs. It was actually sort of an interesting one. The question was, I'm designing a mound and want to use an 1.5-inch force main. The discharge rate's only 11.88, which makes the velocity too small. Is this close enough? So you can see here, sort of the highlighted gray box, 11.88 is just underneath the 12, and it's sort of cut off up there, but it shows the velocities in that area are underneath 2 feet per second, which is too slow. We're not going to scour out the pipe. We could have some buildup in there. So can I do that? Is it close enough? Can I just round up or not? Well, yes and no. Well, technically, no. If the velocity is too small, then the design needs to be changed. If we're not over 2 feet per second, we're not going to have that scouring, and we need to redesign it. However, we also have to remember that these numbers are based off the gallons per minute flow calculated using minimum head pressure. So most likely your pump is not being sized, right to the minimums. And that if you design using a higher head pressure than the minimum, you just bump it up a 1/2 foot or even a foot, probably the 1/2 foot will be enough. And you recalculate that, how many gallons per minute are being discharged for your holes, you're going to have a higher flow, a higher gallon per minute total flow, which means you're going to be over the, 12 probably now, and you're going to be able to use that 1.5-inch pipe, because now your velocity is going to be higher than the 2 feet per second, and you'll be able to calculate that. So yes and no. As if you don't meet it, no, you can't do that. But if you look at it a little bit differently, designed with using a little bit higher head pressure, you're going to have a higher flow, which means you're going to be over velocity of 2 feet per second, which means it's going to be okay. Have this question come up, high strength waste. I'm designing a system that has potential high strength wastewater. Um, it's going to a holding tank. What's required to reduce the strength? Or I've had the question, can we just call it an at-risk system? And can we install it that way? Well, the high strength wastewater is only a concern if it's going to a soil-based system. So if we're going into a holding tank, it's sort of irrelevant, if we have high strength waste. I've had this question about, well, we've got especially a commingled waste that's industrial, whatever we're doing, a butcher plant or something like that, or a bakery, and we know it's high strength waste and you're manufacturing some food, can I be an at risk, or what do I have to do? Well, it doesn't matter. If we're not going to a soil-based system, that's where our concern is for high strength waste, because all our design rates are based on residential strength waste. So if we're higher than that, it's not a concern for us. In the design itself, there may be some concerns about, do I have a wastewater treatment plant that's going to accept this wastewater? That's a whole different issue. But we really don't classify holding tanks as high strength or an at risk, because it's irrelevant. We're not going to a soil-based system. Had this question, what happens if my install is too deep? So during inspection, it was noted that the cell was installed too deep. Now the separation distance isn't met. What can be done to save the system, or what can we do? Well, the separation distance has to be met, so we can't install the system that doesn't meet. So there's some possible options. I've had some where they can revise the soil test to show deeper soils if no limitation exists. So maybe we're not meeting our separation distance because the borings just stopped. I mean, we've got sand that runs forever, but they only tested X number of inches deep, and now we're the installation's too deep. We only have 32 inches separation. Well, if you go out there and auger down farther, or show that we do have suitable soil below that, you could put it in that way, if that's an option. You can always move the system to a new area and start over. Sometimes that's the only option. We could add a treatment device which receives vertical separation credit. You could do that possibly. So they only need a 2-foot separation instead of the 3-foot, if that would make it co-compliant. Otherwise, I have seen in a couple cases what they'll do is they'll remove the cell back out, so the chambers or easy flows, or it'd be worse if it's gravel out there, a little bit more difficult, but remove the cell that's been installed, and then you'd add a sand blanket. So for instance, in that case, we only have a 32-inch separation. You could add a 6-inch sand blanket, so the 32 plus 6 puts us over our required separation distance. We'd be at 38, and then you install your chambers or your easy flow or whatever, or pipe and gravel on top of that sand blanket, and that would make our separation distance. But then again, like we talked about before, Katie had mentioned, if you're installing a sand blanket, now we're going to have to go through revision. Obviously, we're changing the design, things like that. So, but that would be an option for you to get out of that circumstance. Apprentices. Does an apprentice need to be directly supervised? So we've had this question that, we have an apprentice out at the job site, master plumber is not there, there's no journeyman, the apprentice is left alone. Can they be out on a job site alone? Do they have to be directly supervised by somebody? So no, they don't have to. If the master in charge, that apprentice is working under, deems the apprentice is capable, then they can be at the job site unsupervised. So they don't have to be out at that job site with a supervisor. They can be on their own. Another issue I've seen here is we had some questions about tanks and floodplains. Do both the vents and manholes need to terminate 2 feet above a regional floodplain elevation? So that's a requirement. They have to be at least 2 feet above the elevation. So this is a, not a septic system and not one of ours, luckily. Um, but what happens if we are in a floodplain? Not in a floodway. Floodways are different, but if we're in a floodplain, flood fringe, and we need to be up above that, do we have to be up above? I've seen some where we've had like these chimneys like this, where you've got manhole risers going up 10 feet. Is that necessary or not? Well, no. The vents, because they have to remain open, they have to be above the regional flood elevation. But manholes can be made watertight. So if we have something from a manufacturer that states, they got a rubber gasketed seal and they can be locked down so that there's no water infiltration in them. If we get something from the manufacturer that states they can do that, then we can have the manholes below the regional flood elevation as long as they are able to be sealed and made watertight against floodwaters. Then they can be below the 2-foot elevation. Otherwise, if they can't be, then they have to be 2 feet above the elevation. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, next month we're not going to have a POWTS chat. A lot of the staff are going to be out. We have our annual Farm Technology Days, which is being held August 13th to 15th. So that's right during the time of POWTS chat. So we're going to have quite a bit of staff at Farm Technology Days staffing that. This year it's in Cadott. If you're interested or happen to be in the area, Farm Technology Days, it's a trade show for the farming industry. The reason we show up is we do share inside the conservation tent, we share a soil pit. It's a large pit, large trench actually. We share with the USDA Soil Conservation Service and Wisconsin Society of Professional Soil Scientists, talk about soil information. We have some displays there about some cross sections of septic systems, things like that. Farmers, they have septic systems. They go through there. Quite a few people per day go through our soil pit. We're able to do an outreach and discuss with them, septic system functioning and use, or people say I'm building new, or what can I do? So it's a really good outreach for us to get with the community that uses the septic systems. So if you happen to be in the area, stop by. It's an interesting show, a large event. I mean, they can have 50 to 100,000 people a day go through the place. Huge tent city. If you haven't been there or don't know anything about it, check it out. It's you can search for it on the web. Really interesting. But again, we will be out next month. No POWTS chat because we'll be at Farm Technology Days. And anyway, that's all I have. And thank you for your time.